Hi, I'm Coach Michael, former world number 2 and coach to international archery champions. Now today we're going to be covering the topic of best compound arrows. Now that's a very big title, so just to be more specific, this is what I consider to be the best arrows for a compound archer shooting target archery. When I say the word best, I'm meaning what is the best arrow to maximize your score, to get as many points as possible when we're in competition. So it's not the best arrow if you're looking at it from an economic or budget point of view, and it's definitely not the best arrow if you intend to go bow fishing or something. So just bear in mind, what I say is the best arrow for a compound bow might not be the best arrow for you, but if you're interested in scoring the most amount of points possible in target competitions, then this is the video for you. First of all, I'm going to establish what are the best arrows for outdoors and what are the best arrows for indoors. And then after that, I'm going to clarify why they are the best. Okay, so stay tuned till the end. So first of all, we're going to talk about outdoor target archery. And really, for me, the number one choice and the number one choice of the vast majority of competitors out there is the Easton Pro Tour X10. Now this has been around since probably around 2008 and it's been through a couple of developments since then, but it truly has established itself as the number one choice if all you want to do is hit that 10 ring time after time after time. Now it comes with excellent components. As you've seen from my previous videos, I highly recommend having a pin in the back of it and using either the Easton or the nock that I really like, the Biter Hunter nock. That's a wonderful nock, the Biter Hunter pin nock. Fits over the pin, protects your arrow really well. Now when we go down to the other end of the arrow, when we go down to the sharp end, you've got a choice of points. And it's more than just a technical choice, it's a huge financial choice. Now, if money is no object, by all means, the tungsten points are great. I have zero criticisms about them. Well, actually I got one. If you drop them on a hard concrete or tiled floor, they can just break in half. Because tungsten is so hard, I've just paid hundreds of dollars for my tungsten points, and then as I'm putting them in my arrows, I've dropped one, and it's just broken in two on the floor. So that's my only criticism. But from a performance point of view, they really are the gold standard. But the Easton stainless steel point is very, very good. Now it used to be these points had a stainless steel tip and a mild steel shaft or pin that going inside the shaft, and they used to bend. You used to hit target legs, they would bend and then crack your arrows. So when they invented the tungsten point, it was a huge bonus. It really made a big difference between me breaking dozens of arrows a year to me just breaking a few arrows a year. But now with the stainless steel point that's probably been out for the last 10 years plus, it really is a good point. And as long as you spin and you check them every few weeks or after any tournament where you feel like the targets maybe weren't the best, they were a little bit hard, or maybe there was some target stand legs behind. But really, as long as you check them, they're an absolute quality point that can still deliver world-class scores. As for the fletchings, I also covered them in a previous video. So with these components, you really do have a world-class arrow. Now for indoors, things change a bit, especially for the compound bow, especially if you're someone who really wants to take the indoor season serious and maximize your performance. Now personally, I loved the indoor season. I was far more successful and I love shooting the big arrows. So my choice for the indoor, the best indoor arrow you can get, I think undisputedly is the Easton X23 for all of the World Archery events. So that's an arrow that's 23 64ths of an inch in diameter, which is the FITA, or sorry, not FITA, showing my age, the World Archery maximum size. But if you're heading off to the Las Vegas shoot or you're doing other non-World Archery events, you can shoot the Easton X27, which is 27 64ths of an inch in diameter. It might not sound very much, but honestly, if you're used to shooting X10s and then you pick either of these arrows up, they are massive. And just to clarify, the reason we want such a big arrow is because we want to touch the 10 ring. Because with World Archery rules, you don't have to be in the middle, you just have to touch the line of the 10 ring and you get the highest score. So for me, moving from small aluminiums or even X10s going up to the big aluminiums, there's a huge difference. Obviously, the better you shoot, the smaller your group, and the smaller your group, the more these type of arrows are going to benefit you. But even if you're just a club archer, I love the fact it's a change. You've been shooting these little X10s Pro Tours all summer, and now we're changing the season, we're changing our bow. I used to really enjoy setting up my bow for the indoor season, shooting these big arrows, even if maybe back then when I was a kid it wasn't the #1 most important thing. I enjoyed it, it was part of my hobby. Now there's no pins on these indoor arrows. We just put, or I just put for my preference, a biter hunter knock straight in the back, because we're not grouping these arrows. All of these arrows are going into individual target faces. We're not going to be damaging nocks, we're not going to be shooting the back of our arrows, so we don't need that protection, and we can just have a biter hunter knock straight in the back of the shaft. Now, one area that has massively improved over the time I've been doing archery is back in the early noughties or in the late 90s to increase the weight of our point in the front of the arrow, because we found indoors having heavier points helped keep the arrow straight, helped weaken an arrow which was probably a little bit too stiff. We used to buy one 120 grain point, bullet point they used to sell, and then we used to put another one of a slightly smaller arrow shaft in the back. So we used to have to make our own 250 grain points, and you had to glue them together, and if one ever come undone, you would shoot the arrow would go forward and the other point would come back and smash your arrow and fletchings as it was leaving the bow. But now we don't have to worry about any of that. Easton have sorted it. They do a fantastic bullet point that you can then screw these extra weights in the back of. Now I screw them in there with a little bit of glue, a little bit of hot melt, just to make sure they never rattle loose, because again, if they come loose, they're going to damage your arrow and knock when you actually shoot. But with these components, you really end up with a world-class arrow. And as I mentioned in this other previous video, we'll cover what fletchings are best, and personally, 4 or 5 inch feather fletchings are absolutely the best, or the plastic vanes, but I explain more in the other video. So both those arrow choices, in my opinion, are extremely uncontroversial. You've only got to look at the numbers of people competing with them. You've only got to look at the medals. It's clear to see these are absolutely the most dominant arrows delivering the best results. So now I want to add some detail into why I think people get such good results with these arrows. Why, in my 30 years experience, I've honestly come to believe these are what you need to be using. As coach, I always want to make sure what I'm recommending is what's best for each archer, and not just for your professional archer who may have an unlimited budget. Now, to give you an example of this, I hand on heart believe the best arrows straight out of the packet, just cut them, knock them, point them, fletch them, the best arrows you can buy are these Easton Pro Tours. But some other people, you'll see other champions using other arrows and delivering some good scores. But sometimes, I need you to understand, sometimes I know many archers who shoot for other companies other than Easton, and they will get a dozen arrows, and they know in that 1 dozen brand new arrows, there's maybe only 6 to 8 of those shafts that are okay. But because they're a professional archer, they will go through a big selection process. Maybe they'll get 3, 4, 5 dozen arrows to then go through selecting them, testing them, seeing if they're straight, seeing if they weigh the same, to end up with a set of arrows which then is as good as the X10s. And then of course they can go and shoot fantastic scores with them. But I'm fully aware as a coach, you probably haven't got the time, the patience, or the money to do that. Because even the best arrows in the world, you can always make them better and better. But I feel like for you to walk into a shop and buy some arrows, without any doubts in my mind, the Eastons are the most consistent, reliable, and you can have the most confidence that you're not shooting an arrow that's going to miss the 10 regardless of how you shoot. Now, to add more detail onto this, probably the best example I can think of is with indoor arrows. So in the past, I was lucky enough to have access to a hooter shooter. And this is a machine device contraption where you can put in your bow and use the machine to shoot the arrow. That enabled me, once I'd had a bit of practice with it and pinned it to the ground, that enabled me, if I shoot the same arrow over and over again, the same arrow will go in the same hole. For me, I was shooting at 25, 30 meters, I can't remember, but it would go in the same hole if you shot the same arrow over and over again. Because obviously, there's no variability. We should have the machine set up the same, and we got the same arrow. But what really surprised me is I had an athlete give me a set of brand new fat arrows that were not Eastern, but they were all carbon arrows. They look beautiful and they're quite premium. You know, they're a more expensive choice than the Eastern aluminium X23. They look very nice, but when I put them through the shooting machine, these were the first ones I ever tested, and I was really surprised that the group was about the size of the Big Ten. And I thought, oh wow, maybe this is the machine's not shooting accurately enough, I'm not shooting it accurately enough, but then I know I can put the same arrow in the same hole, so that didn't make sense. Then I got a set of aluminium arrows. They weren't new, they were like 6 months to a year old. And honestly, every time I tested aluminium arrows, they went in the same hole. They would literally just pin in the same hole, same hole, same hole. And anytime they didn't, I could either spin it and feel like the arrow was bent, or have a real close look at the knock, and believe me, 3/4 of the time, it's the knock. Hence why in my knock video, I recommend changing them so much. Knocks are so important. But if I had a straight aluminium and it had a good knock in it, they grouped unbelievably well. Often just going in the same hole, time after time after time. And the most ironic part of it, or the bitter pill, I guess, is often these aluminium indoor arrows cost less than these fancy super light carbon arrows, because it's really hard to make an accurate super thin carbon tube. Now down on the smaller arrows, it doesn't seem to be so much of a problem. But for a big arrow, you have to make the wall so thin or the arrow becomes too stiff. But when it gets that thin, trying to get consistent carbon is a real big problem. And I know so many people buy the carbon arrows because they're so used to carbon being better than aluminium. And they're more expensive, so they must be good. But for us, if our primary concern is indoor shooting, particularly 18 meters, we don't care about speed. Speed gives us nothing. We don't care about the lightness because it just doesn't deliver anything to us. What we want indoors is consistency. And these aluminium arrows just come out the same time after time after time. They've got machines that have been making these literally, I think now we've got machines that are like 60, 70 years old, it seems. But they make the most consistent tubing time after time, and they're less money. And if you're shooting modern target archery indoors, you're never going to put the arrows together. You're never going to hit the back of them. You can buy a set of arrows, and honestly, unless you end up falling over on them or trapping them in a car door or something, you can use these arrows for year after year. Another example of maybe where watching someone win a shoot might slightly lead you astray. I was at an international event in Europe, and we had a top American guy over, and he qualified number one. He went through the knockout matches, winning, and he was shooting some really beautiful, large diameter carbon arrows. Not Eastern, I don't want to say what the company was, and he was shooting great. And he made it all the way through to the final. And then when they were setting up the final and the organizer was talking to him about how they're going to do it, as in many finals, you shoot 3 arrows, the judges and the scorers then pull the arrows, and then to save time and keep it flowing, you then go up and shoot another end of 3 arrows while your 3 arrows, your first 3, are being brought back to you. So they were explaining to him how he needs to have 6 arrows in his quiver, ready to compete in the final for considerable prize money, of course. He said, "I'm very sorry, I've only got 4 arrows." And the organizer looked at him like, "What, you've come halfway around the world and you've only got 4 arrows?" And he just so casually said, "Look, I had to go through 4 dozen of these shafts to get 4 arrows that go in the same arrow hole. I just don't have 6. It's just a sad reality of it. So can we please bring the arrows back each time?" And I was surprised how honest he was about that, and I was surprised how casual he was. But he just wanted to explain to the organizer why it was in this situation of only having 4 arrows, because it looks like it's an unprofessional thing to do. But for him, he had done the right thing. He had been sponsored by a different company, and to get 4 perfect arrows, he had to go through 4 dozen shafts and find them. So he'd traveled halfway around the world with only 4 arrows. Now he had managed to find 4 shafts in there that were perfectly the same. So it was great. He managed to win the tournament and he shoots fantastic scores. But I can see that many people will then see he's won this tournament with this particular arrow, and then they might walk into their local shop and buy a dozen and not realize that maybe 3/4 of those arrows they have are not going in the same place. And I can think of nothing more soul destroying than shooting a perfect shot and being rewarded with a 9. So to be clear, if you want the best arrows that you can just buy and shoot and get great results, world-class results, it's the Eastern X10 Pro Tour for outside, and the Eastern X23 for World Archery events, or the X27 if you want to go to Las Vegas. And these arrows, you won't put a foot wrong. If you've stuck around this long to the end of the video, I'd really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. Believe me, every little helps. And if anyone would like some online coaching, I have a few spaces available. The link is in the description, and I'll see you next time. Good shooting.